Buenas and Hafaday, Todos Hamzu. This hearing by the Committee on Federal and Foreign Affairs, Telecommunications, Technology, and Labor is hereby called to order. It is now 2:04 p.m. for the record, and in accordance with Section 8107 of Chapter 8, 5 GCA, public hearing notices were sent on Monday, June 17th, 2019, adhering to the 5 working day notice. And a second notice was sent on Monday, June 24th, 2019, 48 hours prior. In addition, this informational briefing was noticed on the Guam Legislature's website at www.guamlegislature.org. Joining me here this afternoon are, to my left, Senator Kelly Marsh Taitano, Senator Joe San Augustine, and Senator Will Castro, as well as our Legislative Secretary to my right, Senator Amanda Shelton, Vice Speaker Talina Cruz Nelson, Senator James Camacho Moylan, and Senator Therese Terlahi. Colleagues, thank you very much for joining me. Before we proceed with the discussion of items on our public hearing agenda, I would first like to provide some general rules of conduct for all who are in attendance. The conduct of this hearing shall be as follows. 1, when speaking, please ensure that the microphone is on and that you are speaking directly into the microphone for recording purposes. 2, the chair will invite individuals who have signed up to testify. If you would like to testify on the bill being heard today, please step to the side. We have right in the entrance a sign-up sheet. 3, individuals testifying shall first be recognized by the chair before speaking and shall state their name and any affiliations for record purposes. 4, the order of questioning will begin with the panel of senators who shall complete their lines of questioning for each respective item on the agenda. Upon completion of the panel's line of questioning, the chair will pose questions. 5, each member will be allowed to pose a question to an individual testifying for 1 round and then be provided another round if necessary. 6, questions and testimony shall be confined to the substance or nature of the agenda. Personal inference as to the character or motive of any senator or any individual testifying is not permitted. Any violations of this general rule of conduct will result in removal from the public hearing room by the Sergeant at Arms of the Guam Legislature. In addition, in the interest of time and to ensure that all members of our community are heard on this issue, individuals testifying should limit their testimonies to 5 minutes. And we thank you so much for your understanding of these rules and guidelines. On our agenda this afternoon is Bill number 136-35 COR, sponsored by Senator Joe S. San Augustine and co-sponsored by myself, Senator Régine Biscoe, and Senators Jose Pito Terlahi, Clint E. Rigel, Kelly Marsh Taitano, PhD, Talina Cruz Nelson, Tina Rose Munya Barnes, Sabina Flores Perez, Therese M. Terlahi, and Amanda Shelton. An act to amend subsection 3105 of Article 1, Chapter 3, Title 22, Guam Code annotated relative to responsibly raising the minimum wage. This bill seeks to raise the minimum wage incrementally from the current $8.25 to $8.75 by March 1st of 2020, and then finally to $9.25 by March 1st, 2021. As the chair of this committee, I, along with my colleagues, hope to work together with our island's business leaders and the general public to fully understand the impact of this legislation on our island's economy and on our way of life. At this time, I'd like to invite Senator Joe San Augustine to provide his opening remarks as the sponsor of Bill number 136-35 COR. Senator San Augustine.
Half a day, Madam Chair, Senator Lee. Sizuz Masi for hearing this bill and for allowing me to provide a short synopsis on this bill. Bill 136-35 COR is an act to amend Section 3105 of Article 1, Chapter 3, Title 22, Guam Code annotated relative to responsible raising the minimum wage. I'd like to thank my colleagues that have co-sponsored on the bill. The intent of the bill is to responsibly raise Guam's minimum wage with a 50 cents increment effective March 1st, 2020, making it $8.75, and a second 50-cent increment effective March 1st, 2021, making it totally $9.25. Our business community received federal and local tax breaks, and it's time to pay it forward. Those earning minimum wage are not just entry-level workers. They include our veterans, persons with disabilities, and manumco. They also include a disproportionate number of women, single mothers, and minorities. For several weeks prior to the introduction of the bill, I put out a call for comments. I got visits, calls, and emails from many making $8.25 or less, with struggles to make ends meet. They argue that the cost of living continues to rise, but their wages have not kept pace with inflation. The unfortunate reality is that many of our families live in poverty. A dollar raise over 2 years is a small step, but it may make a difference in the lives of so many. I've also heard from and met with many other small business owners who are understandable concerned about the possible impact on them. With input from those means, this prompted a revision to reflect the 2 increments. This allows our business community a reasonable amount of time for implementation. I believe it's achievable, and it's the right thing to do. During this time, I met with representatives of the Guam chapter of Society for Human Resource Management, or SHRM. SHRM is a human resource professional, and are also members of the Guam Chamber of Commerce, the Guam Hotel Restaurant Association, and many other organizations. SHRM conducted a poll of its members and found that they had agreed that the minimum wage should be increased, and the increase should be made in increment, just as the legislation proposes. Dr. Rosanna Jones, an economist with the University of Guam, also presented results from a study they conducted on the minimum wage. Their study reflected in no negative impacts to businesses. In fact, their study showed that the raising of minimum wage greatly encouraged business to reevaluate their practices to become more competitive in their markets. This bill will allow business owners time to make necessary adjustments, so employee benefits may not be affected. I know there are differing opinions on both sides, so I thank you for conducting this public hearing so that our people may provide testimony on their thoughts on Bill 136. When people have money in their paychecks each month, their increased purchasing power stimulates our local economy, and when our people prosper, our local business grow, and our island flourishes. Sidus Masi, Madam Chair.
Sidus Masi, Senator San Augustine, and at this time I'd like to call the panel of individuals who have signed up to testify. Please come forward and be seated when your name is called. Director Dave Della Sola with the Guam Department of Labor. I also have Mr. Ken Lianguro from Guam C4PA signed up to testify, but he has agreed to hold his testimony until the end of the hearing. DeMarco Kineni with Guam Youth Congress. Sidfree Linsongen. Mr. Barry Mead, who has also agreed to hold his testimony. Ms. Jeanette Constantino with DeWitt and the Guam Chamber. Oh, has just signed in to support. Mr. Joe Arnett with the Guam Chamber. And I believe it's Mr. Roman Kanata. We'll begin with this first panel and then we will continue. Mr. Della Sola, the floor is yours.
I'd like to thank the legislature for inviting me to come down. My remarks will be short and brief. My chief economist, Gary Hiles, is off island at this time, but I was able to contact him and ask him what his feelings are as far as what the impact would be with the wage increase. And he felt that the impact would be negligible as far as any negativity, and that he didn't have any issues with the increase. And as you know, that I am also the wage and hour commissioner, which means that I am also the person who enforces the minimum wage. So as your esteemed group decides to pass or not pass, I will be enforcing whatever legislation or whatever the minimum wage is for our island of Guam. With that said, I've looked at this and I agree that if you're going to increase it, that I support the step, 50-cent stepping and spread out so that the impact would have a chance to take into effect and not be felt in all one swoop. I pretty much says it all right there. If there's any questions, I'll be glad to try to address them as you like. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dalla Sola. Mr. Canary?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is DeMarco Thomas Canary. I'm a Guam Youth Congress representative for the municipality of Orda Chalampago, and I'm also the vice chair on the Guam Youth Congress Committee on Economic Development, Labor, and Tourism. I would like to commend all 10 senators who assigned as co-sponsors to the bills, because I believe that raising the minimum wage is one way to combat the increase of price of goods caused by inflation here on island. There are always positives and negatives to every actions we take, and raising the minimum wage on Guam will provide both its pros and cons. I'm a big believer in what goes around comes around, especially when it comes to the economy here on Guam. What you spend on this island will eventually find its way back to you because you supported the economy. One positive aspect of raising the minimum wage is the increased spending power, which is so desperately needed by many of those in our community. And which people will invest back into the island anyways. Besides paying people a wage that is livable, it makes them more interested in carrying out the duties of their jobs if they are paid fairly and they're able to provide more for their family. However, my one concern with this bill was it doesn't go far enough, and I do not mean this as an insult to any of the senators up there today. And I only say this because one of the issues we have on island is the housing problem, and the housing problem does influence people's choices and what they do on island with their money. And for a brief synopsis, because the U.S. military on Guam, the price for housing and renting on Guam is tied to their minimum overseas housing allowances. So a lot of the housing on Guam is tied to whatever the military can pay and not what the people on island believe the value of the house is. And the amount that the military gives these service members is $2,205 to rent out, and that's just with no dependents at E4. And with extra benefits that can come up to $3,700 because they get moving in fees and they get utility assistance. To put that into perspective, one person on Guam would need to work $25 an hour to make about $4,000 in a month, and that's not including taxes. And that would just cover housing for one of our residents here on island, not any of the other costs such as your car payments, your internet payments, your water, your power, your utilities, you know. And it seems to me concerning that when we discuss, the economics of the people of Guam, yes, the minimum wage right now is maybe below standard with what's in the States right now, but it is increasing, and I do thank you guys for taking steps to at least increase the minimum wage so it can keep up with the cost of living here on Guam. And I bring up the military comparison not to advocate for an extremely high minimum wage, but to remind the senators what ordinary people on Guam have to compete with in order to live our lives. And although I do appreciate the sentiment of raising the minimum wage, I still feel it is not sufficiently enough to cover the cost of living here on Guam. And I know that the minimum wage is not supposed to be a living wage, but it at least should cover more than what it does now, especially for ordinary people here on this island. Everyone in this room probably understands how fast $100 can leave your pocket. And it will take you maybe 2 8-hour shifts to even get to $100 working minimum wage. And nothing seems to be getting cheaper, especially our basic needs like gas for our commute and just even food to eat. Preferably, I would have loved to have seen our former Speaker BJ Cruz's bill have passed with the increments at 925 and 1010, which was introduced in the 33rd Guam legislature, but we all take what is due. And it's the same idea that the Youth Congress had in mind when we introduced a similar bill, Bill 3-32, in this current term, which was to incrementally raise it to 925 and to 1010 in the same step that Senator San Augustine bill has. However, I do know Guam's economy has been stagnant, and raising the minimum wage to 1010 would definitely harm our small businesses more than anything else. So, however, any step to raising the minimum wage and providing a higher floor for those working in our service and labor sectors will be met with the full support from both me and from the Guam Youth Congress. So I would like again to thank Senator San Augustine for introducing this measure, and I hope to at least see in the future a complete review so that we can give more purchasing power to those who need it here on Guam. So thank you, Senators, for allowing me to testify today. This bill is a great first step, and I hope that there's more reviews to come within the months and years.
Thank you very much, Mr. Canary. At this time, I'd also like to acknowledge the presence of the speaker who's joined us, Speaker Tina Rose Munia Barnes, as well as Senator Clint Rigel. We'll continue. Mr. Sedfrey Linsangan, you're recognized. Sorry, please turn, thank you.
Yeah. Good afternoon, Senators. My name is Sedfrey Linsangan. Yes, there are 27 or 28 states that raise the minimum wage from $7.25 and some to $12. And there are still 22 states that still implement the federal minimum wage of $7.25. That's including Texas, North Carolina, South Carolina, Kansas, and many others. In regards to those states that raise the minimum wage, there are exceptions unless you are a student less than 20 years old, unless you are disabled, with certain disability, unless you have psychological disorder, you will receive even less than the minimum wage. Let me read some of the state's policy on the minimum wage. Like for instance, in Georgia, there is no minimum wage if they employ 6 or more, less than 6 employees. There is no minimum wage. In fact, they pay only $5.15. Okay, but their federal minimum wage is $7.25. In California, this year they will be paying $13 per hour. But there are exemptions if you only employ 26 or more workers. Now, and again, so many exemptions. If you are farm worker, if you are tip workers, or you are independent contractors, you are babysitters, you don't fall into the minimum wage of $7.25. But it could be less. Like for example, again in Indiana, employees under 20 years of age may be paid $4.25 per hour during their first 90 consecutive days of employment. In Kansas, employees not covered by Federal Fair Labor Standard Act, because they were the one that enacted the $7.25, are subject to Kansas minimum wage law, which is $7.25. Now, there are 2 setting precedent cases that overturn the increase in minimum wage, and that is in Kentucky. In 2016, the Kentucky Supreme Court, Louisville Metro, made a ruling that the minimum wage increase from $7.25 to $7.75 and to $9 by July 1, 2017 is ruled invalid and unenforceable by the Kentucky Supreme Court. Now in Lexington County, again, in Kentucky, the minimum wage increase, because in the states, even the cities, counties, they can enact their own minimum wage, not only the state. The minimum wage increase again in Lexington County from $8.20 to $9.15, and $10.10 to 2018 was ruled again invalid and unenforceable by the Kentucky Supreme Court. Well, as we all know, there are many federal laws that were that were violated. And even some states violated federal law and create their own law. And it will remain still in violation as long as nobody challenges it. It can remain forever because it's hard to challenge a law. You have to go to the court and spend money and be criticized by the people that oppose you. That's why, just like what happened in Kentucky, somebody challenged it and he won. That's why it was overturned because it's a federal law. Now, just like in the territory, other territory, like in American Samoa, they only pay $4.60, $5.99, $5.53. It varies by industry. In Puerto Rico, it again varies by industry. Employers are covered by the FLSA will be subject to a minimum wage that is at least 70% of the federal minimum wage or the applicable mandatory decree rate, whichever is higher. Marianas Island, $6.55. You know, and U.S. Virgin Island, their minimum wage is high, $10.50. But here is the cuts. Here's the exemption. The tourist service industry and restaurant workers who are tip employees must be compensated at a rate of not less than 40% of the prevailing minimum wage. Meaning 40% of $10.50 is only less than $5. That's why, Senators, the point here is you will hurt those people that you would like to help. If the employer will be choosy instead of employing people with disability, with psychological disorder or certain disability, without experience, like 18 years old, 19 years old, without experience, will be the last one to be hired. I have a privilege to speak with one of my customers in the gym, and she told me for already almost 5 years, she was only getting paid minimum wage. I asked her, how much are you making? Yeah, minimum wage, $8.25. And then, is there any benefits? Yes, regarding the service charge. Oh, how much are you getting on the service charge? She said, $400 a month she's getting. So you divide that by 160 hours for 1 month, that's $2.50. He said that's standard, $400 or up. So he's not making a minimum wage of $8.25. And then I asked her again, how about the insurance?
I'm sorry, Mr. Lansangan, if you don't mind, if you could wrap it up, we're over time.
Oh, okay. About the insurance, that is only is getting pre-insurance for family. And that's, if you get a private insurance for family, that's almost $1,000. So $1,000 divided by 160 hours is again $6.50. You know, so he's making $8.25 plus $2.50 plus $6.50. So that's a lot of hour. That's a lot of wage. It's like when I came to Guam almost 40 years ago. You know, even I don't have any dollar in my pocket when I came to Guam. And then my dad, my stepfather, my brother-in-law gave me a minimum wage of $3.30. I started from $3.30. And then, I'm an ambitious young man. I like to get more. So I have to work hard and gain more experience. So it went up from $6 to $7. I'm not yet still, it's up, what I meant is, it's up to the individual to improve himself. That minimum wage is set by the federal. If people would like to increase their wage, then you need to improve yourself. You need to gain skill. Some people even have entered the apprenticeship or internship without getting paid, just to get the experience. Then after that, they will be entitled to higher rate. You know, just like my son, he'll be in residency in next year as a doctor, and he'll be getting paid only like almost $40,000, and that's minimum wage according to the medical standard. You see, that's why it's up to the person. The $725 here in Guam, there's $300, $400 rental that you can afford. In California, one bedroom or studio is $2,000 a month. That's the difference. You know, that's the point I'm trying to make. You know, because you will hurt more those people, and especially now, go to the Agana Shopping Center. How many stalls are closed when you enter the Agana Shopping Center on the right side? You see, what you can do. I know your intention is good. You like to help the people. You need to increase their living. Work with something else, like the cell phone company. How come they're charging us when we are receiving the call? In the Philippines and all other countries in the U.S., they don't charge us. Like gas company, if you get $30, they give you $5 reward. But if you can only afford $5, you don't get nothing. So maybe and then if you get other credit card, you get a 6%. What does it mean? It meant that they can still lower the gas. That's how you can help the people. You know, like the power rate. How can you help the GPA manage their contract? Because sometimes their contract are not favorable to the people of Guam.
Thank you, Mr. Linsangin.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. And
Mr. Chairman,
if you'd like to provide additional testimony on this bill, we're also having another hearing at 6 p.m., so you can come and testify at that hearing as well.
thank you, Madam
Do you
Chairman.
have anything else to add?
No more.
Okay.
If you have don't have any question, I will yield to the next speaker.
Okay, thank you very much. And that would be Mr. Arnett from the Guam Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you, Senator Biscoe and other senators in attention. I represent the Chamber of Commerce as the chairman of the committee. We appreciate the opportunity to present our comments on Bill 136-35, as the issue would be greatly impact not just to our membership, but the membership community and the business community in general. Our organization felt compelled to share our thoughts and legislation on this legislation. Further, we feel that if the intent of the bill is to truly approach the increasing minimum wage in a responsible manner, that a balanced approach must be applied which won't adversely impact the cost of doing business on Guam and seriously increase the costs and services of the island to our community. To begin, the Guam Chamber of Commerce has always held that a position of minimum wage is a starting wage and should be determined by market conditions and not arbitrarily dictated by government mandate. As we have shared during most recent discussions in 2014 and 2017, most of our business entities on Guam are small business, many with limited resources. Therefore, when the government establishes policies such as tax or minimum wage increases or any other effort that raises the cost of operating a business, the end result would include in either mounting costs at the cash register or increased unemployment. In recent years, there have been a number of such policies adopted, which is why the cost of basic everyday commodities such as milk, bread, and even diapers have escalated. Furthermore, with the continuation of anti-business measures resonating as government policies in this political environment, even operating a business will continue to be difficult, especially when it seems that the answer to public sector spending is to impose additional taxes and increase fees at the expense of the private sector and the community. Our organization recently reached out to our membership to discuss Bill 136 with the intent of not only attaining input on how raising the minimum wage would impact their operations, but also to gain their thoughts and comments on the issue, as well as other government policies. Here is a brief summary of their responses. 61% of the responses did not support the bill, while 26 supported the measure. 13 were uncertain of what the bill would do to them. 66% of the respondents reported the government-mandated wage would adversely impact their business operations, while 29% replied that the increase would not affect their operations. 86% of our respondents say they would support a measure that reduced the beverage privilege tax from 5% to 4%, and 86% stated they would utilize the savings from the tax to increase their investment in business operations. When asked how savings would be invested if BBT reduction took place, 44% of the respondents would increase employee wages and hire new employees. 34% make investments in technology and infrastructure, while 19% other as their preference. One clear and consistent message that with any minimum wage increase measure, such as Bill 136-35, small businesses are the one that will be truly impacted. Respondents expressed concern on other issues, including recent tax increases for BBT, liquid fuel, weights and measures, followed by the excess and red tape and regulations that it takes to even get the doors open. Several expressed their thoughts on how Guam is not really a business-friendly environment, with high costs as well as complicated time-consuming requirements to conduct business. There were many comments associated with the government's increased spending, and as expected, the respondents' trust and confidence in the government's spending of taxpayers' dollars was not positive. Bill 136-35, Bill 136-35 states that one of the reasons the wage issue was propelled is because of corporations received huge tax cuts as a result of the Tax Cuts and Job Act of 2017. What this legislation fails to recognize is that the majority of Guam businesses who will be adversely impacted by the government-mandated minimum wage increase were not huge benefactors of the federal tax cuts. Additionally, by increasing the business privilege taxes by 25% in 2018, the government of Guam abolished any savings businesses could have saved by the federal mandate if eligible. The objectives of these tax cuts were not for business owners to purchase penthouses, suites, or yachts, but to invest their business operations, of which most popular investment would have been in their employees, just justified by the results of our survey. It must be also mentioned that a great number of businesses, entities on the island are proud community partners and continue to support their employee base with contributing to their many needs within the island. Nonetheless, since there is an effort by the legislature in pursuing an increase in the minimum wage, the Guam Chamber of Commerce will continue to stand by the position that was communicated with the former Speaker B.J. Cruz in 2017, and that a two-tier wage increase option, as noted in the legislature, is palatable. However, it must be tied in with a number of other considerations in order for this approach to be fair, balanced, and responsible. These are the recommendations of the Guam Chamber of Commerce. Incorporated two-tier minimum wage increase would be as follows. Tier 1 on April 1st, 2020, $8.25 to $8.75 an hour. Tier 2 on April 1st, 2021, $8.75 to $9.25 an hour. The two-year option provides businesses the opportunity to plan and acclimate to increased operational costs. When a government mandate forces the entry level to be increased, the question now raises how to address the wages of those already making $9.25 or more. The two-phase approach would allow some transition time for these employees who have earned increases recently and are now making an amount above the minimum wage. Most businesses are interested in keeping their employees and compensating them to amounts well and above the minimum wage. And on Guam, many in private sector do just that. The average annual increase in the private sector is anywhere between 3% and 5%, and in most cases, these raises are built into budgets. Nothing prevents any business from providing increments well above these thresholds, which would be mandated by law. Likewise, any employer who brings skill sets and or experiences to the table will be able to command higher starting salaries. Juvenile wages. Just as a minimum wage is a starting or entry-level wage, a juvenile wage is the contrary. It is important to establish a juvenile wage so that a different type of the workload expected from the employees is made. A juvenile is simply seeking a temporary part-time or after-school job, while an entry-level employee is seeking to build skills and an opportunity to grow within an organization. We recommend a juvenile wage to be set at $8.25 an hour. Thus, even as the recommendation of increasing the minimum wage is set for April 1st, 2020, that a juvenile wage for those under the age of 18 remain at today's minimum wage. Nothing prevents any business from paying more. However, this should not be mandated arbitrarily by law.
Mr. Arnett, just wanted to let you know that you're a little bit over time, so if you could just wrap up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Actually, the answer is investments in our workforce development. There's a number one priority of the Guam Chamber of Commerce this year. It's no secret that we have problems finding good qualified individuals. The focus should be on appropriating money to workforce development causes and institutions who are training our people to be better prepared for the jobs that are going to be available here in the next 3 to 4 years. We all are competing for a shortage in labor. Increasing the starting wage is not the answer. The answer is to improve their skills so they can command a higher wage. In closing, the Chamber of Commerce, which represents over 450 members who employ over 40,000 island residents, does not support government mandates which increase the minimum wage. However, because it seems to be a route the Guam legislature will undertake, we request that a reasonable consideration be made from the recommendations in this testimony and to approach this issue with balance, fairness, and more importantly, responsibility. We additionally highly recommend the Governor of Guam take a hard and serious look at cost cuttings of the non-essential staff and services to live within its means. Thank you very much for the opportunity to comment on the bill. We are open to further discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll also note that all of the members of the committee and every single member of the legislature has also received your written testimony, so we will have that, and if you'd like to continue this conversation at 6 p.m., we welcome you. Next up on our list, we have Mr. Roman Kanata. Mr. Kanata?
Hey, good afternoon, Senators. I'm actually here either I'm not for it or against it. I'm here in behalf of the Guam Hotel and Restaurant Association regarding the definition of wages under Chapter 22, Section 3104F, where we would like to have that definition amended so the tips and gratuities and service charge can be included to meet the minimum wage.
Thank you, Mr. Kanata. I just want to remind you that the bill that we have on our agenda today is amending subsection 3105.
Yeah.
So
But
we
the
want to
section
just
that I'm
make sure that
quoting
we,
you is the definition of wages.
right, so we just want to make sure that we stick to the
Sure.
agenda. Thank you.
But
Please continue.
that's what it's being asked is that, they're not for it, against it. We just like to have that definition changed to include using tips and gratuities to offset minimum wage or meet minimum wage during their restaurant establishment and tip credit employees. So whatever the results of the bill, whether it passes or it goes through, they're looking at if you can consider reinstating that definition to include that, because widely it's being used now to help out with the minimum wage of all the wait staff and the tip employees.
Thank you, Mr. Kanata. And if you could just clarify for the committee, are you in support or in opposition to this bill?
With my personal opinion,
Sure.
neither or. I've seen a lot during my tenure at labor that some businesses cannot make it. Some businesses cannot even afford to pay it. So, and that's how I feel. But it is good if it goes up. I mean, it's a benefit to employees that do need the earned wages. But as my part, I'm neutral on it.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. Mr. Mead?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Half a day and good afternoon. My name is Barry Mead. I'm a former member of the Guam Education Board. I'm the founder and past president of the Guam Community College Faculty Union, former chair of the Guam Community College Bargaining Unit for the Guam Federation of Teachers, and former treasurer of the Guam Federation of Teachers. I also hold a business license as a consultant on labor and serve as a representative of the GCC Faculty Union. I'm here today as a conflicted person in a conflicted position, as I believe our non-government of Guam employees are severely underpaid, mistreated by most employers, in that they have no benefits such as health insurance, sick leave, and vacation time, as well as being regulated to 20 to 32 hours a work week. Hence, I'm in favor of seeing increases in pay for minimum wage earners, but I'm also opposed to Bill 136-35 as proposed. I will omit the next paragraph because I might get ejected, so I don't want to get ejected. I'll leave it out. A recent report given by Mr. Joe Bradley, former chief economist of the now defunct Department of Commerce, whom I worked under as an assistant economist, stated how Guam's economy is stagnant, has been for some time. The cost of living on Guam, though, has risen non-proportionately to wages overall. Driven by increases in taxes at all levels, including real estate, GRT, gasoline, taking away all the gains in the recent Trump Tax Act that taxpayers and businesses benefited from, to supposedly refill the government of Guam coffers, instead of the government of Guam reducing expenses. We are seeing again of rash pay raises, attempted pay raises, excessive hiring, and wasting of funds by this new administration, unrestrained by this legislature. The gas tax, as an example, was done supposedly because the Territorial Highway Fund had no money. Wrong answer. Yet some $6 million from that fund goes to funding the Mayor Council of Guam and the mayor's offices. This is an office that has 6 people, it has 6 vehicles, and it has 6 individually assigned gas credit cards. That's pretty good for me. And all the employees in all of the mayor's offices are paid out of this fund except 19. There's 1 at each office that isn't. Additionally, the mayor's offices collectively have 141 vehicles, 68 personnel assigned personally by name a GovGuam gas fleet credit card. I derived all this information from a FOIA that I sent to the MCOG last year, and I've sent it to almost all of you up there. When their budget comes up, I sure hope to see some changes. Though 22 GCA Chapter 5, Guam Employment Relations Act, exists, 22 GCA Chapter 4, Right to Work, all but eliminates the processes defined in Chapter 5. Personally, I call the law the right of employers to screw their employees, as well as instead of at-will hire, it is better to be called at-will fire. As well, 22 GCA Chapter 4 all but makes 22 GCA Chapter 3 Fair Labor Standards moot. In the second set of documents that I provided you, there are all the statistics on this, and I'm only going to highlight some of them. My main contention here is that if this legislature and this governor, who all say they are for bettering the livelihood of the poor, want to make people get out of poverty, make our island a better place to live for them, then please, before you enact any increase in minimum wage, do things that will help increase job opportunity and provide more jobs on Guam for Guamanians. It's crazy to me when I keep reading comments about we need more vocational education in Guam when we have about 2,800 students attending GCC vocational classes in all of our high schools. Save DOE. DOE. That's 2,800 kids. And it's ironic to me, this is addition to what I have written, but it's ironic to me that the Contractors Association still ignores these GCC programs to recruit apprentices. I've been over with them dozens of times. They wanted to go to the middle schools to recruit apprentices. Well, hey, why aren't you recruiting apprentices from the GCC programs? It works very well for our culinary arts program. And it works very well for our automotive technicians. But everybody else, they ignore them. Enforcement, going back to enforcement of the QC program, where primarily GHRA member hotels must send their local employees to GCC and UOG, mandate apprenticeship to UOG. They don't. I was a department chair at GCC for the Tourism and Hospitality Department for over 10 years. And in those 10 years, I saw not one student. When Mary Okada became president, the first thing I recommended to her is quit signing off on the document that says we are doing what we're not. We don't see them. They're not in compliance. We need to mandate apprenticeship programs, quotas, for companies that hire H-2 workers. I suggested this to the former governor about 3 months before he took office, after he was elected, that on a 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 basis, any company that wants to hire an H-2 worker should also include an apprentice. Gee, 5 years ago, if they'd done this, would we be begging Congress or begging the feds to overturn the H-2 and start approving them? We would probably have our own local people where the money would be going to the island economy and not to the Philippines and China. We need to regulate how off-island students are being utilized in the hotels through GHRA programs and require them to do the same for our UOG and GCC students. These are students that come here from Japan. They're given room and board, other benefits. Meanwhile, our interns, our high school interns from those programs, they receive nothing other than the training, which is good, but lastly, we needed two other things that you have the ability to do. First, implement an unemployment compensation program. For these companies that like to at-will fire everybody, they can pay for it. In Hawaii, it's a 1% to 3% in payment based on their total payroll. 1% for those that don't fire people and have a low turnover, 3% for those that have a high turnover. This is an incentive for companies to work more with their employees than fire them. And lastly, repeal right to work. We have a Democrat majority, we have a Democrat governor, and Democrats are notorious in favor of unions. Consequently, prove it. Repeal right to work. Repeal at-will hiring. Some of the problems that go in line with right to work and what it does. And Guam, by the way, is a perfect example of the negatives that go in line with that kinds of legislation. Currently, we have a minimum wage of $8.25, and if it's a 35-hour work employee, they make $13,728 a year. Currently, Guam is ranked 53rd in counting all states and territories, meaning the third highest, with 23%, or some 35,800 people of Guam live below the poverty level. It's a fact. I understand that this coming year that the Department of Education will provide free meal, free breakfast, free lunches to every single kid attending every single school. Why? Because it averaged 75% of all our kids qualify for the federal free and reduced meal program. Gee, how is that?
Mr. Mead, I want to thank you for your testimony and just ask if you could please wrap
thank
it
you.
up. Thank you.
I'm trying. Real quick, Guam per person rate for SNAP program, it's $189.70 per person per month, and is only second behind Hawaii in the highest amount paid. This goes to 46,713 individuals, 15,551 households, and down this year, matter of fact, it went down to $106 million total. We have $27 million in vouchers for GURA, 2,265 active vouchers for Section 8. Guam exemplifies the negative impact that RTW, right to work, has on local and state economies. Guam spends less on education per pupil than any state. For fiscal year 2016, the national average was $11,762. Utah was $69.53. Guam is $66.50. Guam teachers are some of the lowest paid in the United States. Of the 10 states with the worst paid teachers, 8 are right to work. Prenatal care in Guam is one of the lowest in the U.S. Minimum wage earners and part-time employees do not receive the same benefits as full-time employees and management, resulting in less or no medical coverage and no sick leave days. Guam wages are the lowest in the United States. You can read the document, I gave it to you. Right-to-work states have a poverty level of 13.5% across the board, compared to 12.2% in free bargaining states. As I mentioned earlier, Guam has 23% of our people are at the below poverty level. There's just a number of things. Lastly, in favor of speaking about unions, and though I believe in unions only because I believe in treating employees fairly, I've always professed that if companies don't like unions, then get good management, because good management will always beget the need for a union. You as a manager want benefits, well then share them with your employees. Why do people want to work for the government of Guam? You get annual leave, you get sick leave, you get health insurance that, my Medicaid's better, care's better. But you have all of those benefits that all employees would like. You have family leave. You have an above minimum wage. When I first started teaching in Guam, I started teaching people say, well, aren't you going to go to work? Yeah, I'm not going to go to work in a hotel. I'm going to go to work for the government of Guam. And it took me a while to figure out why. Now I know. But gee, the government of Guam has union representation for its employees. Statistical data, okay, so union wages, The ultimate beneficiary is the overall state economy. Workers who don't want to join, and this is already by law, though some people tried to say it wasn't when we enacted this law, workers who don't want to join a union are already fully protected by federal law. Federal law provides that no worker can be forced to join a union, and non-union workers cannot be forced to pay for union activities that violate their religious or political beliefs. If an employer and union enter into a voluntary union security contract, a covered worker simply has to share the basic cost of representation. Back when I was the treasurer of the GFT, one of the senators then tried to negotiate with the president, John Birch, and I that, he would make it mandatory that everybody joins the union, and we told him you can't do that. It violates federal law. Plain and simple. So all of these folks that are worried about that, have a nice day. They don't have to. And as I said, good management begets hardcore unionism. So I hope you all consider these things, especially show the people of Guam that you're not just wanting to give the minimum wage earner a pittance of 50 cents an hour increase, but show all of us voters and all of us taxpayers that you're willing to start reducing the expenses of this government. It's overboard. It's beyond means. I could go on, and I will be here when the mayor's council or the mayors come up for their budget. Oh yeah, baby. I'll be sitting here again because I have a lot more to share. You want to talk about waste, fraud, and abuse. So to my two fellow Republicans up there, thanks guys. I was going to wear my MAGA hat, but And for the rest of you, thank you very much for letting me be here today. I'm honored.
Thank you, Mr. Mead. And if you, I just also like to note that all the members of the legislature have received your written testimony, so we have access to that. Thank you very much. And
Madam
at this
Chair,
time, I'd like to.
Madam Chair.
At this time, I'd just like to recognize
Okay.
Senator Telo-Taitigui and that she's joined us. And I would like to provide an opportunity for my colleagues to ask questions of this first
okay.
panel, beginning with the author of the legislation.
Okay,
Thank you very
Madam
much.
Chair. Thank you. I just have a real quick question.
Sure.
First, I apologize, Madam Chair, for being late, but I was listening as I was coming to the session hall, and I heard Mr. De La Soto's testimony. And though Gary Hiles is not on island, you just gave us a verbal reasoning of what he said. He just basically said he has no problem with it. But I think, Madam Chair, I think we should get a more educated or written testimony as to why he feels that this minimum wage increase is not a problem for him. So I would like something in writing to explain that thoroughly, and that's all my request. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Taitigui, and we'll request that of the Department of Labor to do Masi. Any of my other colleagues have any questions for the first panel? Questions or comments for the first panel? If not, then we will continue with the list of folks who've signed in. I have Hannah Iriarty from Department of Labor. Ms. Iriarty, would you like to provide oral testimony? Okay. I also have Thea Waneza from Department of Labor, Miss Mary Rhodes from GHRA, Joe Bradley representing himself. And if anyone else would like to provide oral testimony today, please sign in. If not, we'll have Mr. Ken Leon Guerrero. And Ms. Rhodes, you're recognized.
Hafaday and good afternoon, Senators. Hafaday Chairperson, the Honorable Senator Régine Biscoe, our Speaker of the Legislature, as well as the sponsor of the bill, Senator Joe San Augustine, and of course all of the senators from the 35th Guam Legislature. Thank you for having us be allowed to have an opportunity to give opinion of Bill 136-35. GHRA, on behalf of its board and membership, would like to express our opinion of this bill with regards to increasing it in increments by 50 cents by March 1, 2020 and March 1, 2021. As the leading NGO for tourism, GHRA is focused on meeting its mission in working together with our senators, but also with our tourism stakeholders, so that we work on laws and regulations that truly affect our industry. We are comprised of more than 300 members. GHRA has been a leader in the industry actually since 1972, and we account for more than 1.5 million visitors and employ 20,000 people, which is more than 30% of our population. We remain steadfast in our belief that the legislature of Guam should be creating laws to help grow the economy and not suppress or inhibit growth by increasing the cost of doing business, by increasing wages, taxes, fees, and other types of regulations. Our minimum wage is intended for entry-level positions, and wage increases should be based on performance, experience, skills, and other factors that are determined by the employer. While we don't agree with the government-mandated increase that took place prior years, it was very clear at the time when we worked with the legislature that, of course, that it is time to start pursuing minimum wage increases, and we really, truly appreciate the relationships we've had with the senators over the years, because we were here just back in 2017, and it was the decision to hold off on that because our economy wasn't performing as well as it should at that time. Also, with the results of the independent economic study, I know that I participated in a panel with several people with the Guam Women's Chamber of Commerce, and I also attended the University of Guam presentation with Dr. Roseanne Jones. And I know some of the senators were there, and it's kind of hard to take her entire presentation and give one soundbite that she didn't think it would affect things, because there was a lot of data she actually presented with regards to those who are actually at the minimum wage level, which was less than 3% of the population. And if you look at those individuals that are within the threshold where compression would take place within that next dollar, there were more people in that would be more affected by compression wages than actually the minimum wage increase. So it's important for us to understand where we are positioned. And with this recent bill, Bill 136-35, in a recent survey with GHRA members, those who are in favor of the bill, we were able to get 27.2% respond in favor of the bill. In opposition was 63%, but we still have 11.3% without really they weren't sure of whether or not they would support. But majority of our members were still in opposition of a wage increase at this time. During our 2014, 16, and 17 testimonies, we did speak out against the wage increase with the passage of Public Law 32-178. It was very important at that time that we made it very clear, and we worked with the senators to also really understand the importance of conducting an independent economic study if any additional wage increases would take place. And this legislative body has not asked for that or worked with the government of Guam to get an independent economic study done so that we can move forward if we're going to consider another wage increase. So we are employing our senators for this legislature to look at that public law and understand that you're supposed to be doing an IES before you do another wage increase so you can truly understand the economic impact of another wage increase. To what Senator Tidigree had mentioned, we can't take anecdotal statements. We need real data so we can move forward when we're making decisions like this. Some of the responses with regards to effects of a minimum wage increase, in 2017, 34.3% of our membership said they would freeze jobs. In 2009, or this year, it's 32.5%. It's about the same. For reduction of hours, it's actually increased from 35.9% in 2017. This year, 48.8% said that they would reduce hours, and according to the SHRM study, they actually also stated 39.19% would reduce hours. So I don't think we can really say that there's no impact to the economy or to jobs or to the people working in the industry. For implementing layoffs, 15.6% would be laid off back in 2017, and we did see effects. If you look at the the jobs that were lost during that time, there were jobs lost. And in 2019, 13.9% of our membership said they would also implement layoffs with the 2-year increase. For raising compressed wages, 55.3% said they would have to deal with that and work on raising compressed wages, but also this year, 55.8%. I think you have the data, obviously, and I won't repeat or mention all of them, but one of the things that really stood out to us was the raising cost of goods. Back in 2017, and it's very hard when, sorry, Joe, but whenever economists say that we don't increase cost of goods, there's a lot of things that they can attribute factors to, whether it's increase in taxes, increase in fuel, increase in wages, increase in shipping costs. There's so many different variables that go in raising costs and what goes into the cost of living. So it's very difficult for them to really say it was attributed to just the wage increase. But regardless, we have seen wages as well as cost of goods go up over the years. So 62% of our membership in 2017 said they would raise the cost of goods. This year, 76.7% said they would increase it. For the SHRM as well, where we had a comparison, we noticed when you talk about reduction of benefits, back in 2017, 29.6% said they would reduce benefits. This year, 25.5% said they would reduce, but SHRM's number actually shows 40.54% would reduce the benefits. And with SHRM, they would have 31% eliminating benefits. So if you actually look at some of the employers who got rid of retirement plans or even insurance plans, that did take place back in 2017. So GHRA would like to humbly ask the legislature, should they consider this wage increase? And we all know that majority of the senators are sponsoring this bill, and it's been on a lot of people's platforms on the election prior to, everybody getting the seat at the senator in this legislature, but also, with our governor, we understand it was in their campaign. Although we do, as an industry, as a member trade organization, it is our job to work together with government and advocate on behalf of our industry. We know that at times there are things that we may be opposing, but there are times also where we can work together on some things. And so GHRA has been asking for the last 3 years, and which is why we brought in the former director of Department of Labor today to provide advice on how to amend the bill. So we're asking that should you consider this, you amend the bill to change the definition of wage, because what happened in prior years is that the language, the definition used to include tips and gratuities. So we used to allow, and there was a lot of confusion out in the market where people are still, they are still dealing with tip credit, and they're confused about what minimum wage is with or without tip credit. So it's very important that we reestablish tip credit, and tip credit is really, according to the Fair Labor Standards Act, it is a wage that would be approved by the legislature and added in as a definition to the Guam Code annotated law, where if you took, for example, the federal wage of a $7.25 or even our current minimum wage of $8.25, tip credit is only for employees who customarily and regularly receives tips or gratuities from patrons or others. So these are not only hotel employees who have tips, it's also hairdressers, housekeepers, you have valet, you have a lot of people who receive tips. And so those are already defined by the Fair Labor Standards Act. So the employer may apply a tip credit wage per hour. So if you take a $7.25 per hour, but if somebody makes $20 in tips that 1 hour, they would get $8.25 today plus their $19 in tip per hour that they're working. So it's actually in addition. The employee never loses with tip credit because the employer always has to pay the minimum wage plus tip. So this is in the Fair Labor Standards Act, and tips are really where the employees have to declare it and also claim, pay FICA taxes on it. The employee also has to at least, again, minimum wage for all hours worked, whether or not they received a tip. So if an employee received $0 for tip, then the employer then has to pay that minimum wage. They're not able to subtract it. So if the tips actually received by the employee combined with the wages do not at least equal that, the employer must make up the difference. Regardless if they hired that employee at $7.25 an hour, they still have to pay $8.25 today. That is the law. Any portion paid to an employee which is shared with other employees who customarily and receive tips under a tip pooling or similar arrangement shall be deemed for the purpose of this section to be tips actually received by the employee. Again, because they pay taxes on that, so therefore it's wholly theirs. They cannot share it, and also it cannot be, the company can't take their tips from them. Where tips are charged with a credit card, the employer may pay the credit card company with a percentage on the bill, but the employer may reduce the amount of credit card tips paid to the employee at the end of that payroll period, because a lot of times they have to wait for the statements and for accounting to work through all of that. That is only time an employee has to wait for their tips, is if it's on a credit card. If it's a cash tip, they have to receive it that day, and they have to declare it. And most POS systems actually have a section for declaring tips, so it's easy for accounting to track when they have to pay.
Thank you so
credit.
much. You're over time, but if you could just wrap up.
Sure.
Thank you.
So again, it's very important that we ask that tip credit be considered. In addition, similar to what Guam Chamber of Commerce testified with, we have asked for also 3 years to include a youth wage, because as we go up to possibly $9.20 or something else in the future. We really have to think about those, the youth that are between ages 14 through 17, that a lot of them are allowed to work, but it would be very difficult for an employer to pay a higher wage. So we're asking that the Guam minimum wage be considered for a youth wage, and that being at $8.25. So with regards to investing in workforce development, we are really tied in Guam Department of Labor with regards to workforce development. We have done a lot over the years, and we really are very proud of that. We've actually been an employer sponsor of registered apprenticeship since 1986, and there are currently over 400 apprentices, and I have to say, Mr. Barry Mead was incorrect. Right now we have more than 30 apprentices in tourism right now with GHRA, but we also have employers that are directly contracted with Department of Labor on their own apprenticeship program. If you guys don't know, also we applied for a grant with U.S. Department of Labor, and we just received a grant of $1.72 million, and this is for pre-apprenticeship. This is before anyone can actually either get a job or they're currently in a job, and before they go into apprenticeship. So we're very proud of the fact that Guam Department of Labor and GHRA has gone after that, and GCA Trades Academy has already started that cohort. And so having a youth wage is extremely important in giving the younger generation really an opportunity to get the job skills that they need. But the minimum wage, as stated earlier, is not a living wage. And it's very important that we look at this comprehensively, and you strongly look at alternatives, like a youth wage, like tip credit, because what that allows is the business can then adjust with changes in the market, especially with market conditions, increases in wages, increases in taxes, and if tip credit is there, which includes tips and gratuities like service charge, then they can spread out the wealth a little bit more to deal with compression of wages, to deal with non-tipped employees who are like in the back of the house that would never get tips. Sometimes there are managers who are getting less than tipped employees. An average tip employee makes $20 to $40 an hour in tips. And so those aren't your minimum wage employees. And so if your intention is to really help those that fall within the 3% of getting a higher minimum wage, there's certainly not so much in the service industry, but in other jobs. And that by creating a tip credit, those who are making an average of, with that average of $20 to $40 in tips, then they can spread it out some more so that we can afford to pay more employees with an increase in wages. So I really thank you for your consideration, and we really humbly request that you take strong consideration to add the tip credit and again, the youth wage, if we are to move forward with this. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rhodes. And again, we have your written testimony, and it is provided to all the members of the legislature. Thank you very much. Mr. Bradley?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chairman. My name is Joe Bradley. Monday next week, I will have worked as an economist in Guam for 35 years. I've been around a little while. In fact, I don't know how many times I've testified on minimum wage legislation. The first time was when it went from $3.35 an hour to $3.80 an hour in 1990. Wow. I used to have more hair then. I'm with Mary and with Mr. Kanata. I'm neither in favor of nor opposed to this legislation. My purpose is to provide information that may make it easier to make decisions on these types of issues. And I'm not going to go through this whole massive mess that I've put down on paper here. Also, I'd like to say that I'm here testifying as a private citizen. I'm not testifying on anyone's behalf other than my own. Thank you. What, I'm not loud enough? You can't hear me. I've done a lot of research on minimum wage research over the years. And what I've learned is that there are two major concerns that are registered by most people in looking at an increase in the minimum wage. One of those is that prices go up. Well, there's not very much evidence of that. And what evidence there is that prices will go up over the course of a month or two following a minimum wage increase. But the primary reason that the price increases are not that high is that the minimum wage, or the increase in the minimum wage, constitutes such a minute portion of total revenues of a business. And also, businesses tend to not raise prices in the same amount that they've had to raise their employees' wage payments, but they also take a little bit of a hit in their profits, so that it's spread between prices and profitability. And that's, I have not done that research directly, but I have done research into the research done by dozens of prominent economists in the mainland. The second thing that most people see or anticipate with an increase in the minimum wage is that the unemployment rate will rise, that people will lose their jobs, or that people's hours will be cut. That's not what the research finds, except in a very few cases. Most often those cases that research is done by trade associations. Now, it's pretty simple to understand why inflation doesn't increase dramatically with an increase in the minimum wage. But why not unemployment? You're raising the minimum wage. Demand for labor, quantity demand of labor decreases, the quantity supplied increases, driving a wedge between supply and demand and creating unemployment. Well, that's Econ 201. And the model of supply and demand is certainly a good template, a good educational tool to show how markets work. But the fact of the matter is, when you make one change in an economy, it causes a lot of other changes in the economy. And raising the minimum wage actually tends to create jobs, because you're giving more money to people at the bottom end of the income spectrum who are going to spend that money. They're not going to save it, they're not going to invest it, they're going to go out and spend it buying goods and services. That increases the flow of funds throughout the economy, and by doing that, there's more business going on and more reason to hire additional employees. And we've seen that here. I attached a series of graphs to my presentation. I think they should be self-explanatory, but toward the end here I will talk about the last of those. Of course, there are limits. Please don't raise the minimum wage to $150 an hour. That would be entirely disruptive in our economy. It would cause a severe recession. It would drive up the unemployment rate dramatically. Of course, it'd give me a raise, but it takes a while for systems to adapt to changes in one area. Increasing the minimum wage is a little bit like squeezing a balloon. You may contract it at this point, but it shows up someplace else. And I think that the fact that it takes prices time to adjust, to bring relative prices back into line, it is possible to raise the minimum wage too much. I don't think that that has been experienced so far in the United States. There have been a number of cities that have raised the minimum wage to $15 per hour. And there's also some consideration in Congress right now to raise the minimum wage to well above $9.25 an hour. And so this may all be moot. But probably the most important piece of information that I can provide to you is a historical comparison of minimum wages and the purchasing power of the minimum wage. I'll let you look over my shoulder on this, Mary, if you'd like. I can fold the page there a little bit, yeah. And adjusting our minimum wage for fourth quarter our 2007 prices, which is the base for our current price index. But going back to the end of 1983, the $3.25 per hour minimum wage then would be worth $13.36 per hour in 2007 prices. That's a lot. And we aren't even proposing anything near that. But as prices have continued to rise over the years, the minimum wage has also increased, about 10 times, I believe. But nonetheless, we've seen the purchasing power of the minimum wage continue to fall. And as of the first quarter of this year, the minimum wage, the $8.25 minimum wage was the equivalent of $6.34 per hour in 2007 prices. And that's a pretty severe deterioration of the purchasing power and therefore the standards of living for people who work at that end of the income spectrum. And I think that's an important consideration in all this. I also have a surprise for Mary. I'm going to agree with you.
I like that.
No, I think that something was left out of the 2014 legislation that should be considered, and that is there's a distinction between tipped positions and non-tipped positions. In tipped positions, we now require that they be paid the full minimum wage as any other employee in a non-tipped position. This gives a tipped position the opportunity to make, I don't know, about $20 to $40 an hour in tips. The only time I worked in a restaurant, I was 16, and never again. And it was an untipped position. Yeah, that was before 1990, before 2007. Yeah, quit picking on me. I think that it's something that could be very easily reinstated. It's just to draw that distinction, and Mr. Kanata mentioned that it was the tipped minimum wage was at 40% of the base minimum wage. And I don't know, I can't vouch for that one way or another, but I seem to recall that it is something along that order. And then you kind of take out that distortion in compensation for people. And that distortion really, you squeeze the balloon one place, it pops out someplace else. If we can remove those types of distortions from the market, then I think we'd be money ahead. And other than that, if you've got any questions, comments, criticisms, suggestions, complaints.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bradley. Appreciate it. And lastly, we have Mr. Leonguero.
Before I start my presentation, I just want to make one observation. Since the beginning of this year, my favorite fast food combo meal has gone up over 30%. We can't blame it on the increase in the business privilege tax because that was in 2017. We can't blame it on the fuel tax, and we can't blame it on the increase in minimum wage. This is a symptom that is all across the board and affects everyone here on Guam, especially those that work in low-wage service sector jobs. Go ahead and start the presentation. Start the video, not the PowerPoint. The PowerPoint is actually longer. That's 102 slides. Huh? Yeah.
Mr. Leonguero, just so you know, we will be including your PDF in what we send around. We won't print it out, but we'll make it available to all the senators.
Yeah, that's why I provided it.
Thank you.
Roads right now. And how we, as a people, address the issue of living wages will determine whether or not our people are going to be able to stay on Guam much longer. And it's not just me saying this. We're also hearing the same thing from the Board of the Federal Reserve, who issued a report in May 2018 entitled Economic Well-Being of U.S. Households. And as I read the report, it occurred to me it would be very compelling if I took Guam data and compared it to the U.S. data. So I did a survey here of people working on Guam to collect the information to match against the federal report. According to the Federal Reserve, 30%, 3 out of 10 adults, have variable incomes that makes it hard to pay bills. Here on Guam, 37% of workers have variable incomes, meaning most of them have shift work. According to the Federal Reserve, 1/5 of all adults are not able to pay their bills due in the month due. When I looked at the same numbers here on Guam, it was amazing. 62% of all adults have trouble paying their bills in the month due. And 10% of all adults in the U.S. need outside financial support to pay their bills. Here on Guam, 26% of adults need outside financial support to be able to pay their bills. One of the more striking findings was that 40% of all adults will be unable to deal with a $400 emergency. Here on Guam, 66% of adults do not have the resources to deal with a $400 emergency. And here's another scary statistic. In the United States, 25% of adults skip medical care due to being unable to afford the cost. In Guam, we learned in the budget hearings that 75% of the people attending Guam Memorial Hospital are unable to afford the cost because they have insufficient insurance or medical coverage. There's a huge misunderstanding about welfare, who's on welfare, and also the concept of working poverty that this legislature needs to address.
People working full-time jobs but still living paycheck to paycheck. That's the reality for many families across the Chromeless. But many times those who have never struggled to stay afloat think those on government assistance are lazy or are abusing the system. Fox 14's Randy Ayala is exposing this long-standing myth.
Constantly working but still struggling to make ends meet.
This is somebody who goes to work every single day and still can't cover expenses.
There are more than 127,000 households in Northeast Louisiana, and more than 72,000 of them are living below the ALICE, asset limited, income constrained, employed threshold, meaning they're one emergency away from a financial crisis.
Working mothers, fathers, families with kids, trying their best to get by.
The basics, rent, food, utilities, and clothing, have many families in the Chromeless unable to pay every bill every month. Add affordable health care and daycare to the mix.
They may wind up having to make choices between, like, paying the water bill this month or paying the electric bill this month.
20% of Ouachita Parish households are living in poverty. That's an annual salary of barely over $13,000 for single-parent homes, and a little over $25,000 for a family of 4.
Trying to think about the future, but they don't have enough money to save.
So where do these families turn?
Things like food stamps and housing assistance and Medicaid.
Giving many taxpayers who help pay for these type of government assistance programs a belief that those getting the benefits really don't need or deserve them.
The poor that are mooching off the system while the rest of us pay our way and their way.
Oh, these people are just taking advantage of handouts.
But experts say that's far from the truth.
We want to hold on to that myth. We can only do it by ignoring the reality that Alice has now put right in front of us.
United Way's Alice report shows real data of what the daily lives are like for those living in economic distress. More than 31,000 households in Ouachita Parish are struggling to afford the cost of living in the Pelican State.
A whole lot of people who work very hard to try to make ends meet, but are in a position of having to make choices, not because of any lack of effort on their part.
We all know Alice families and Alice households.
So how do these families break free? Nora says it's up to all of us to make a change.
We need to do some things to make sure that work pays enough to support a household. Our community institutions and the leaders of those institutions need to step up and begin to push this kind of information out.
And understand the working poor are trying to get out of their circumstances, but often can't do it alone. Reporting in Monroe, I'm Randy Ayala.
Hawaii is Guam's canary in the coal mine. Anything good or bad that hits Guam usually hits Hawaii first, starting with the tourism industry. It hit Hawaii in the 50s and 60s, it hit Guam in the 70s and the 80s. Like Guam, Hawaii has a high cost of living, and like Guam, Hawaii has a large percentage of their population living paycheck to paycheck. Like Guam, Hawaii has a major shortage of affordable housing. The affordable housing shortage is so tight that a family of four making $93,000 a year qualifies for housing assistance. A single person making $67,500 a year qualifies for housing assistance. Hawaii we've seen a huge explosion in Hawaii of multi-generation households, and Hawaii too has a growing resident exodus. In fact, the population for Hawaii has declined 3 years in a row as more people leave the state than move to the state. So, as we can see, Guam and Hawaii have a lot in common. Like Guam, Hawaii's major industry is tourism. And like Guam, Hawaii's tourism industry is made up largely of low-wage service sector jobs. In fact, according to government statistics, 65% of the jobs on Guam are low-wage service jobs. 62% of the jobs in Hawaii are low-wage service sector jobs. On Guam, 34% of our population is eligible for SNAP benefits. Hawaii, 37% of the population receives SNAP benefits, food stamps, supplemental nutritional assistance program. On Guam, 11% of our households get some form of housing assistance. In Hawaii, 11% of households there get some form of housing assistance. So what does working poverty look like in Hawaii?
And Mr. Leongoro, that's time, so I just wanted to give you an opportunity to wrap up if you'd like to add any additional testimony. We'll also provide the video to all senators. And if you'd like to come at 6 o'clock, we can continue the conversation.
Well, basically what we're seeing here is that a substantial part of our population is trapped in working poverty. They have no benefits, they have no medical insurance, and the only way they're going to get out of this situation where they're living from paycheck to paycheck, just one $400 unplanned expenditure away from eviction, power cutoff, car repossession, is we have to raise the minimum wages. Because there are a number of myths that we have to deal with. Earlier today we heard about the let the free market set wage levels. There is no free market here on Guam. 34% of the economy is government driven, and that's 3 times more than any other state or region, including Puerto Rico, which only has 14% of the government as their GDP. Every business on Guam loses employees to the government. You very rarely hear government employees leaving to go work in the hotel. But every year we're going to hear politicians, and some of you included, are going to stand up and say, we need to raise government salaries to make the positions more competitive with the private sector. We just passed a bill doing that for the Guam Election Commission. We gave them raises to make their positions more competitive with the private sector because they're unclassified. There's a bill in the budget, there's $350,000 to reevaluate the government pay raises again, even though in this video I show you where U.S. Department of Labor and Guam Department of Labor statistics point out that non-managerial employees for government in Guam make twice as much as non-managerial employees in the private sector. And then the second myth is that education is the silver bullet. Let's give them more training. What we're doing here is we're spending tax dollars training people to higher levels of skill for jobs that don't exist, and they leave and go to the mainland. Every single day I'm hearing about people who graduated, they got their degree, and all they can get is a bookkeeper job. And the next thing you know, they're working in Las Vegas as the accountant for a restaurant chain there. Just in the past 2 days, we've lost 3 people. One went to Alaska, which oddly enough has a lower cost of living than Guam. I was surprised to hear that. A teacher left Guam and went to Salt Lake City, and another person is in the process of leaving this next week to Albuquerque. So we are losing our young at their peak of their earning, at their tax paying period. We graduate 2,500 people a year in an economy that generates 1,000 jobs a year. It's unsustainable. There is no competition for labor here. I mean, businesses routinely tell employees, if you don't like the salary, quit. There's 1,000 people looking for a job, and they're right. So there is no free market economy here. There is no job mobility here. In other words, when I lived in Reno, Nevada, another low-wage service sector tourist destination, I drove to California. I could drive 300 miles, and I was earning Silicon Valley wages living in Reno. But we can't do that here on Guam. You know, you can't get on a plane to go to a job interview in the mainland because it's $1,300 one way. It's $1,500 round trip if you plan it. You know, in Puerto Rico, they can fly from Puerto Rico to anywhere on the West Coast, East Coast for under $200 one way, walk up. So we don't have job mobility here. We have companies coming from North Dakota recruiting people on Guam because their economies were disrupted by the oil industry. Everybody is leaving fast food, hotel, hospitality. People are leaving Kinko's and other low-wage service jobs to do labor in the oil field, so they're coming out here recruiting people from Guam to go work in chicken processing plants and the cruise lines. So our number one export used to be our children. Now our number 2 export is our workers, because our people are so upset and fed up with trying to make ends meet. Now I told you earlier, my favorite cost of my favorite fast food meal has gone up 30% in 6 months. Over the past few years, the cost of living has gone up 30% across the board on everything. The federal government recognizes it. Federal COLA over the last 5 years has gone up between 13 and 18%. Government of Guam, all the autonomous agencies are paying between 3.5% and 20% incremental increases based on classified or unclassified. What are the private sector getting? Nothing.
Mr. Leongoro, I also want to give my colleagues an opportunity to ask any questions that they might have. So.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and again, it'll be made available to the senators and will be made part of the public record as well. Mr. Senator Shanagstein, any other senator have questions for this panel? For Ms. Rhodes, Mr. Bradley, or Mr. Leongoro? Senator Lahi, you're recognized.
Thanks, and thanks to all of you for your testimony. I just wanted to run one thing by you. So, it's been suggested to me, because my committee's health, that really to benefit more of the families on Guam, instead of raising the wages, we should mandate health insurance. And I wanted to know, what your perspectives are on that. I am very curious. I think I heard a study once, but I don't have it in front of me, about what percentage of the hotel industry, what type of benefits are they really giving, and how would they respond to like mandated benefits? And Mr. Bradley, if you would also opine on that. I mean, I guess that's not my expertise, obviously, so my very basic understanding of it is we're going to get them the health insurance that we're hoping they're going to get with a minimum wage increase, but, they have to cover themselves, which is getting very, very difficult to do, almost impossible on Guam, actually, to insure yourself for health care. So, but yet, right, all of these, even with this wage increase is not going to be enough, I think, like Mr. Leonger was pointing out, to really bring people up to where they're going to take care of that kind of thing for themselves at this point. They're still going to be, we're still going to, I think, have the same types of requirements to cover the community health-wise. So,
Senator Cherlahi,
yes.
we've asked the folks coming to testify to restrict their remarks to the bill. So if you have questions with regard to the current bill that's on our agenda, I'd offer you to ask those
what
questions.
I'm asking, if they think this bill is more beneficial than something else like that.
You're talking two different things. Guam is in the midst of a health care crisis, and pretty soon we're going to be like other areas in the Pacific where 75% of their Department of Health budget goes to fighting chronic disease rates. Part of that is because people don't make enough money, they can't buy healthy food. You go into the supermarkets on food stamp day, and the majority of the food you're going to see in the cart is low-cost, high-volume bulk foods, which drive up diabetes rates, high blood pressure, and cancer, and all those things can be traced back to the shift in the diet. Hawaii had a unique process, and back in the 70s, they put in a two-tier structure. If you provide health care benefits, this was the minimum wage. If you didn't provide health care benefits, this was the minimum wage. Since then, Hawaii has 93% coverage, and they have the lowest increases in medical expenditures in the nation because they have a healthier base population as a result of 20 years of people having medical coverage. So universal coverage here is a different conversation than we're having right now. But right now, people are having their power cut. They're having their cars repossessed. They're being evicted from their homes, some people said, I'm proposing that we raise minimum wage to $9.25 October 1 and $10.25 October 1, 2020, because 50 cents and 50 cents isn't going to do it when we're looking at the fact that just in the last 6 months, my fast food meal has gone up 30%. That eats it's actually 60 cents. So in 6 months, that 60 cents would have eaten that 50 cents an hour increase right there. So the minimum wage increase and a sensible minimum wage increase from $8.25 to $9.25, and then a year from now from $9.25 to $10.25. But probably a year from now, the federal minimum wage will probably be $15 an hour. But we can't wait for the federal government to act. We need to act right now, because right now people are suffering financially, and right now about 60% of our population is below the ALICE level.
Thank you. May I ask Mr. Bradley, did you have any comment on that?
Actually, I'm going to defer to Ms. Rhodes on that. She has background in insurance,
All right.
and I
Thank
really
you.
don't.
Ms. Rhodes, appreciate it.
Yes, actually, I have spoken to this in the past, and it is related to the wage bill, because when it comes to, and that is why the question exists in our survey as well as in the independent economic studies surveys, because when it comes to total compensation, when you're looking at wage increases, businesses will choose to reduce benefits. And one of those things would include health insurance, especially in a non-mandated environment. Although there are some requirements with federal benefits on what's included in the insurance. Guam is still not mandated as far as what is being offered and how. So the challenge in that is with what you were alluding to is we have done surveys in the past, and although 100% of all of our hotels, for example, offer benefits, the participation rate, the eligibility rate may not be 100%. So for example, when 100% of the companies offer these insurances, maybe only a percentage, maybe only 60, 70% are eligible because they're full-time employees. There are a lot of part-time, casual, on-call employees. And that's where really the challenge is when you have those types of employees who choose either by design, by themselves, to have multiple jobs because they're getting their wage plus tip elsewhere. They want to have flexibility so that they can work only certain hours, right? And then also they might be participating in social welfare type programs. But when you look at, as you drill down further on participation rate and eligibility, that's when fewer employees actually participate. Because either by design, again, with their status in what type of employee they are, if they're not full-time. If they are also full-time, it comes down to how much they're making, if there is a contribution. So similar to GovGuam, if you guys are only, not you guys, but if the GovGuam employee is only getting $50, for example, to the premium every month, how many of them actually participate in the program? You have to look at that. So I think that overall, to answer your question, I think that Guam has been needing a visit into really a review of the insurance. A lot of times, I think we've been dealing with Obamacare and a lot of the mandatory regulations with regards to federal, but we never really address our local needs. We missed the boat with individual insurance in applying for that for the federal program. So that's why you don't see a lot of people being able to afford or even get a reasonable health insurance plan. If they go out for an individual, you have to have at least 2 employees or more to get a health plan on Guam. And so it's very challenging, and as long as regulations in the healthcare industry don't really exist except for federal mandates, you will have an extremely varied list of reasons why people may or may not offer insurance. Until you address that, then you really can't expect it to be across the board. And as it relates back to wages again, it's kind of the same with tip credit. When that was removed, just so you know, there are a lot of businesses who didn't know, and there are businesses who still pay below the minimum wage. That's illegal. And so we've been working with Department of Labor, and actually the director of DOL, Dave De La Sola, sent out a memo, a press release a couple weeks ago to clarify that, because there's still confusion. And that's why we're actually asking to reinstate it again with the tip credit, because it does allow businesses, but it does not allow them to pay below minimum wage. We have to be clear about that. They are not allowed to pay below the minimum wage. At the end of every payroll period, they have to pay that employee their fair wage, plus all the tips that they received. So I think, I don't know if I answered your question in a roundabout way, but I think it will affect participation rates on the employer side. It'll affect whether or not an individual chooses also to take on the plan if they have to pay a portion, because what you might think as a 50-cent increment, remember there's taxes to be paid. The employer also has to pay taxes on that. So it's more than a 50-cent increase every time you increase wages or taxes. People are paying more, whether it's the business is paying more in corporate tax, income tax, and then the employee is also not making that full 50 cents. So everybody is having to make adjustments in their decision making. And not everything is as simple as it's just a 50-cent increase. It's easy to absorb. So people and businesses will make decisions based on whether or not they can truly afford it. And I think the problem that we're all agreeing to, including Ken, is that most people can't afford insurance these days. And our biggest challenge is Guam has a small population. So there's a lot of ways to address it. I think that's probably for a different roundtable discussion maybe, and I would be more than willing to come back as GHRA or even with my previous experience to work with the insurance companies to talk about it. we've talked about it for a long time. I think it's time we really address it. Because I think a lot of them, I think Frank Campillo was, in the paper just the other week, talking about it's due time that we really address insurance and regulations of it so we can have even a fair playing ground, especially with the rates that we pay between our providers.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other colleague wish to ask questions of this panel? If not, I'd just like to say Stos Masi, Todes Hamzu, Purifanatan Midzu Pagu, the Committee on Federal and Foreign Affairs, Telecommunications, Technology, and Labor hereby recesses this public hearing. Written testimonies may be submitted through email at Senator Biscoe Lee at guamlegislature.org or may be hand-delivered to our office at 163 Chalan Santo Papa here in Hagåtña until the close of business on Friday, July 12th. Again, this public hearing is in recess. We will continue later today at 6 p.m. to hear further testimony on Bill 136-35 COR. We thank you so much for your participation. The time is now 3:55 p.m. Sidus Masi.